Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Tri-Board meeting of the Boards of Finance, Selectmen, and Education. I'll ask everyone to please rise to the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Before we get started, for members of the public, if we could just do a quick around the table introduction of who's here with us today. We'll start with Jeff Tyndall.
Hello. Sorry. Jeff Tyndall, Board of Education.
Good evening, Lydia Tadone, Board of Education.
Brian Watson, Board of Education.
Susan Selena, Chair of the Board of Ed.
Bert Helfand, Board of Finance.
Linda Schofield, Board of Finance.
I'm Lisa Hebner, Board of Finance.
Art House, Board of Finance.
Derek Peterson, Board of Finance.
Wendy Maxudis, Board of Selectmen.
Heather Getz, Board of Selectmen.
Amber Abiel, Board of Selectmen.
Eric Harmon, Board of Selectmen.
Maria Capriola, Town Manager.
Matt Curtis, Superintendent of Schools.
Amy Merriweather, Finance Director.
Melissa Appleby, Deputy Town Manager. And we have members of, we've got the Chairman of the Police Commission here.
Jason. Neil Sullivan, Assistant Superintendent for Administration.
Super Recklin, key Assistant Superintendent for Teaching and Learning.
And Melissa, why don't you
And you have Chris and Sean on
and we have Chris and Sean on the TV,
the Zoom.
on the Zoom. Welcome to you all. Thank you for putting this out. Welcome and thank you for coming to tonight. Tonight's meeting is the first step for members of the public in a collaborative process. We hope to leave this meeting with a better understanding of the facts that will affect that process. The size of the town's financial obligations for the coming year, or at least some of them, the needs of the town that have to be addressed, the general economic climate, and what it means both for the cost of operations and the tax burden of our residents, and also any early concerns or priorities that any members of any board want to share. It's right, I have a little mic, but thank you guys. Here's how tonight will go. I had a chance to meet with both Susan and Wendy and to consult with Maria and Matt and Amy on the process for tonight. And what we're gonna do is start with an overview of sort of where we are, some big picture ideas. Then we're gonna take a first look at fixed costs for Maria and Matt. And then we'll open it up to discussion from all three boards. Towards the end of the meeting, I'll ask our board if there are any questions or information they need from your boards so that you'll know in advance anything we know after tonight. And then after that, we'll close the tri-board and our board will do a discussion, our initial budget discussion. We don't anticipate giving any formal guidance tonight because we do not have the grand list at this point. But we may give an initial impressions, thoughts, and concerns at that point. I did want to let folks know that we're working with the Director of Finance and the assessor and getting our consultant who did the revaluation give a presentation to the Board of Finance sometime in the month of February, hopefully at a regular meeting, but we may call a special meeting for that. So I want to let folks know to keep an eye on that if you have an interest in that. Okay, with that, we'll start with the Board of Finance. If you could go to the next slide, please. I'd like to begin with the Board of Finance presentation by telling you what our board hopes the budget will accomplish. This is something we voted on at our last meeting. I want to give credit to the New Canaan Board of Finance with our thanks for use of some of their wording on a couple of bullets. The Board of Finance's goals this year, you will see, are fairly similar to some of our goals in the past. Provide the financial resources to maintain Simsbury quality of life. I assume that's all of our goals. That's why we're here. That's what we're elected. Adhere to town fiscal policies. Maintain Simsbury's AAA bond rating. Strategic use of reserves and ARPA. To utilize and communicate data-based decision-making. Coordinate current spending with long-term planning. Account for all contingencies we can reasonably project or anticipate. Once adopted, budgets should be amended only when urgency requires. Fiscal transparency and citizen engagement in the process. And then hold any growth in the amount to be raised by taxation, along with any resulting mill rate assessments, to the smallest amount that is consistent with these objectives. as I'll explain later, it's to be hoped that new economic development would cover increases in expenditures, but that doesn't always happen. Next slide, please. I just mentioned the fiscal policies of the town, and here you'll see that the same assumptions that we used last year. They're consistent with what we do every year. 15 to 17% general reserves. That's a rating agency's best practice and Government Financial Officers Association best practice. 8% debt service cap, but targeted at 7%. With interest borrowing costs rising, that target is going to be more towards 7 and may go lower in future years depending on what happens with interest rates. 98.5% conservative tax collection assumption rate. Pension investment assumption at 6.5%. 20 to 25% health internal service fund reserve, and a balanced budget, which we are required to pass by law. Next slide, please. This year, the Board of Finance has identified several areas that we think will make it harder to achieve our budget goals. As all three boards are aware, but the public may not be, debt service spikes this year by a little over $2 million. The debt service spike is not a surprise, but the amount of the spike is a little larger than fiscal year 2023 projections because borrowing costs have increased with inflation. Inflation will also increase the cost of utilities, materials, and healthcare. Trends in enrollment will mean we will need additional resources for our schools. The effects of the pandemic are still being felt in special education needs and costs. Health reserves are healthy at 23%. But in the past, they were large enough for us to use part of those reserves to offset increases in health costs. We don't anticipate being able to do that this year. So that's one bucket that will not be available to us at this point. The revaluation of property is a tax levy neutral process, but it will not affect all homeowners in the same way. And that means it will be a communication challenge. Going on to the positives. Now, with all that said, there are some positive aspects to this year's fiscal outlook. Although we don't have the grand list numbers yet, we do know that the grand list is stronger than it would have been thanks to an initiative undertaken by our town assessor to capture new growth that was missed in earlier budgets. For the public, this was an initiative of the Board of Finance from the last budget cycle, and it was implemented with excellence by our assessor and our Director of Finance, Amy Merriweather, with our sincere thanks. As of November, that initiative generated over $1 million in new revenue, and we expect the final result to be higher, closer to $3 million. That's $3 million of the kind of new growth that will help offset any budget increases. In our long-term planning, we anticipated the debt spike in this year's budget. We allocated funds to cash for capital, planning to eliminate those funds in the 2024 budget. This will offset the brunt of the debt service increase by about $1.2 million. The Board of Education's non-lapsing fund has a healthy balance of $650,000. There were pre-planned uses for this fund, but it's money that we won't have to raise through new taxes. Unlike in past years, the Parks and Rec Commission has a healthy reserve level. An experience study done by the town saved the town over $100,000 by calculating more accurate actuarial assumptions for our employee benefit plans. At this point, we're projecting flat state aid for budget modeling purposes, which I put as a positive because we don't anticipate it going down at this point. Finally, as you see on the right, we have $3.7 million in funds from the federal government under the American Rescue Plan Act. And our capital reserve fund has $1.9 unassigned dollars in it. It also has some assigned dollars for the police that has been earmarked, and that's a little over, somewhere between 300 and 600, but that's earmarked for a specific department. Going on to unknowns. Here in January, we don't have all the information we need to complete our financial guidance and our next budget. The biggest of these and the most important one is the final grand list number. We should have the actual grand list number in late February. State aid is still an unknown, but as in past years, we anticipate budgeting the governor's numbers that he provides in February. We're anticipating about $5 million in costs from revaluation appeals, but that's only an estimate. Health costs continue to be finalized, but this cost will be a challenge this year, and you'll hear directly from Matt and Maria on that in particular. And of course, the boards of selectmen and education are just beginning their discussions. Matt will talk about the initial kindergarten enrollment projections they are planning on, but April will give us a closer look. Going on to the next slide. As we prepare our new budget, we should also be aware of long-term trends. Looking back over the last 5 years, the total town budget has increased about 15%, that's just expenditure-wise, or 3% per year. The town budget, not including the Board of Education, has increased about 26%, or about 5% per year. The debt service and capital has increased by 32%, or more than 6% per year. The Board of Education has increased by about 10%, or about 2% per year. You'll notice that the increases for the town and for capital combined are about the same as those for the Board of Ed in absolute dollars, even though the percentages are different, so about 7 million and 7 million. Going on to historical tax data. Do expenditure increases always mean tax increases? And as we all know, but the public may not, no, they don't always mean a tax increase. Here you see that even though budgets have gone up, taxes have been mostly static, some ups and downs. For a home valued at $350,000, the difference in the current tax rate from the rate 9 years ago is only $73. That's mostly because of new growth on the grand list, which has been used to offset expenditure growth. While this is an interesting number, I do want to note that it might not be absolutely accurate, for some of the home values changed due to revaluation during that time period as well. But it does give you sort of an idea of where we've been, and congratulations to all 3 boards for that work. The last column on the slide shows the national rate of inflation for CPI for each of the years since 2015. As you can see, none of the past budgets on the slide had to take into account the kind of inflation we're experiencing now. The CPI for December 2022 is down from the number that appears on this slide, but it came in at 6.5%. That was just a few days ago after the slides were complete. The next slide is Matt Curtis's favorite slide. This shows what our I put this in for him. Yes, it's the Pac-Man slide. This is why it's there. But we don't do it in yellow for just that reason. The bulk of your tax dollars go to education. I don't think that's a surprise to anyone. Then debt service and capital, then benefits and insurance for town employees, followed by police, public works, and other departments. Because the towns and schools are service organizations, most costs are people costs. Debt service and capital have both school and education capital included. Going on to the next. So what drives the budget increases? Consistent with the allocation of where our money goes. In terms of absolute dollars, most of the increases in the most recent budget from last year went to education. The next largest increases went to debt and capital, then police, town benefits, information technology, and then public works. And you can sort of see how that lines up. Going on to the next slide. The expense categories I just mentioned include some long-term obligation, and our board gets asked about that a lot, so I included them here. The long-term obligations to service the town's debt, to fund pensions for town employees, and to fund other post-employment obligations known as OPEB will cost a little over 11 million, close to 12 million this year. OPEB is zero because it is adequately funded, with our thanks to prior boards of finance. And well, I do want to mention. They make up a little over 10% of the town budget, which is considered a reasonable amount, just so folks can sort of see these are things we are legally obligated to pay, and they make up about 10% of the budget before we do anything else. Next slide, please. At our December meeting, the Board of Finance have requested a breakdown of town and education debt, which you see on this slide, and you'll see that the Board of Ed accounts for most of the debt. So it's about 72% to 27%. A lot of that is going to be driven by Latimer and some of the capital needs of the Board of Ed that we've had presentations on in the past. Okay, this is the next slide, please. Is there any way to move their picture so we can see the full? The budget, yeah. That's good. That's great. Thank you. The budget must also cover fixed costs, and this is the first look at the fiscal year 2024 budget. It is just estimates. It will change a lot over the next few months, but it's the first look. It's a preliminary look at the fixed costs based on the initial figures we've received from the town manager and the superintendent of schools. There's a net expenditure increase of 7.33%, or about $7 million. As a comparison, last year the net expenditure or balance to be raised by taxes was $2.2 million, or 2.3% increase. So that's about $4.9 million above last year. But again, we are just at the very, very beginning of the budget process, but that's a big number that we're seeing. And I just want to mention that the fixed cost numbers that we're seeing here are not final, and they will be changed. We're going to hear from Maria and Matt what's driving those numbers. The fixed cost numbers do not include any savings initiatives, any offsets, and they do not, obviously we don't know the grand list. You can have an increase in expenditure if the grand list comes roaring in. The grand list doesn't come in, an increase in expenditure goes directly to a tax increase. Okay, going on to the next slide. Taking a look at our debt service graph, still using last year's capital improvement plan, you'll see that debt service barely exceeds our 8% of the budget, but that's mostly because the budget is growing at a rate that is faster than expected. The Board of Finance target remains at 7%, and 8% is still the exemption. Debt service is increasing $2 million this year. If you look at the striped green, is that green? Okay, the striped green on the very end, that's the cash for capital that we used in the last year's budget. That's going to be eliminated and become debt service. If you look at the next bar, that's all debt service. So no cash for capital contribution. That's how that worked. That was part of the planned mitigation of debt service. We could have done a huge lower tax and then a big leap, but we decided to spread it out because there were needs that we could meet last year and then smooth the increase for this year. So that's where that comes from. For 2025, we anticipate another increase in the cost of debt service by $1 million. So you can see when we passed Latimer, we had a discussion among us how when we do that, debt service was going to go up. Debt service is going up $2 million. That's quite a bit more than the Board of Selectmen's budget. When that happens, it's like any other department. If one department goes up by a lot, it puts pressures on every other department to come in lower. And we knew that was happening, and this is the year it hits. All right, next one. Grand list projections. So it's a reval year. You'll see that the grand list projection is supposed to go up 25.95%, but that includes revaluation of current properties. It does, and new economic development or improvements to properties. And what really drives the grand list is not, what drives taxes is not revaluation of normal properties that have had no improvements, but it is what can offset taxes is new economic development or additions to or improvements to current properties. And we don't have that breakdown yet. So some of the 25% increase is just the normal increase. All properties went up 25%. Doesn't mean you have that much more revenue. It's not a revenue number. It's not a new revenue number, not all of it. Some of it will be, but we've asked Amy and Maria for that breakdown, and we hope to have that as soon as possible because that will show us what's really driving taxes. And one thing I do want to bring to everyone's attention, if you look at the out years, you will see a contraction in the grand list. These are conservative numbers and they may go up in the future, but I did want to raise that as a concern for all boards to be aware of. The contraction in the grand list will make future budgets very difficult if those numbers hold. Okay, going on.
You want to explain that
The contraction in the grand list? Mm-hmm. So the grand list means there's less value, so there's less money when there's...
But the cause of it is...
That's what I was wondering, is why we...
So some of it's business depreciation. We can, when we have the revaluation company coming in February, we'll ask for that breakdown. We have very limited data. Our board has been presented with very, very limited data, so we don't know.
So you're not aware of any new construction or things on the horizon that might mitigate that?
So we had asked Maria to incorporate that, and they do work with the planning department to project new things. Yeah, so it should
this
be
is inclusive of anything that might be new?
not all because they don't have all the information. Maria, do you want to speak to that?
Yeah, sure, just very briefly, I mean, those projections in the out years from our assessor are incredibly conservative. And, you know, we do have some new discussions with our planning department, but, in all likelihood, I would say that we could probably expect numbers in excess of that. Typically during, a little bit further along in the budget process, and usually during the manager's budget, presentation, we will sort of update our historical new growth, and we've been trying to do about a 20-year look at that, and I'd say in a more common year over sort of the long term, new growth is around 0.75%. What's been really unusual and very positive over the last 3 years is we've sort of had record new growth after record new growth, and so over the prior 20 years outside of our value, we had only had new growth in excess of 2% one time. But in the last 2 years, we've actually had new growth in excess of 2%, and most recent year, new growth was in excess of 3%. So we've been sort of fortunate from a budgetary perspective, and in the last few years, we have really had remarkable new growth. But again, sort of if you look over 2 decades, a normal year is about 0.75% for new growth.
One of the things we're looking for as our board is to get more accurate long-term projections. It's very hard to sort of project. And so one of the things we've assigned money in the capital reserve is an assessor audit to get our assessor and the planning department the tools they need to help do better long-term projections. It is a complicated thing. I do want to, acknowledge that it is hard to do, but there are new tools out there, and we thought that among other things, the assessor audit would help get our assessor and the planning department and the town manager the tools they need to make better projections. So we'd have, instead of very conservative numbers, we have realistic numbers because that helps us plan going forward a little bit better. But that is a challenge, but I did want to bring this to folks' attention because it is the best. We can only act on the numbers that are given to us, and these are the numbers that were given to us by the assessor. So that's going to be guiding us until we get better numbers, and we do expect numbers to change over time. Okay, going on to the next slide. Here you can see sort of town services cost per resident, and you can see another way of looking at the budget is to consider how much the town's expenses cost on a per resident basis. Over the last 9 years, that cost has increased by about 34%, or an average of 3.91%. In dollar terms, that's an increase of about $352, about $39 per year. And that goes from 1,000 to 1,300. Next slide, please. For education, the cost of education on a per student basis, this increases to that cost have been smaller in percentage terms, but much larger in absolute dollar terms, and that's consistent with some earlier slides. Over the last 9 years, it's been a 22% average, or 2.4% per year. In dollar terms, that's a difference of about $3,300 or $280 a year. Does that mean taxes have gone up? No. Go back to the grand list. The grand list has been helped to mitigate those increases. The bottom line is that our fixed cost expenditures are going up from what we're seeing from initial projections. They're higher than they've been than I've ever seen them. And debt service is also going up. But we don't know what the tax impact will be. We do have some preliminary numbers, and we'll go through scenarios after Matt and Maria present theirs to sort of take a look at some things that could be and where we are and where we might be and what factors might change the initial numbers. I do want to let members of the public, very, very preliminary, these numbers will change. The grand list always comes in very conservative and tends to go up as the months proceed. So I don't want to alarm anyone, but I did want to, it's a good starting point, and it sort of level sets everyone. Where are we starting, and where are we going, and where do we want to go? And so with that, we'll turn it over to Maria.
Most helpful tonight. just to provide some of our background information as we're heading into our budget development process. So right now, we're in the midst of reviewing all of the departmental operating requests, as well as the capital requests, as well as the service improvement requests. So all the information we're going to share tonight is very high level and preliminary, but I think it will just provide some good background for everybody. So when we're working on, and the primary budget team members are myself and our deputy town manager and our finance director, and when we're really working on putting together the overall budget, we're really taking into account the policy direction and the community vision of the Board of Selectmen. That's really the most important pieces for formulating our budgets. And so they did adopt a set of goals for their 22-23 term. We do share that comprehensive document for you as part of the background information, but essentially the areas of focus for them are strong financial management. Oh, my last strong financial management and capital planning, supporting the health, safety, and well-being of our community, developing an economic vision for our community, and fostering an engaged, high-quality workforce. In addition to sort of those community vision goals that they set for their term, on an annual basis, we also go through a goal-setting session for myself. But when I say for myself, it's really the organizational priorities that we have. And our major focus areas are various HR and labor relations tasks and projects, our financial management projects, and development work. And then we have a number of special projects and initiatives. They could range from important capital work to ordinance and policy development. Again, this is just a small sampling of some of the important projects that we're working on this year. But again, that whole document was appropriated for your packet as well. There are two other sort of guiding goal documents that we also work off of as part of our budget development. And one is the Economic Development Commission work plan. So on an annual basis, the Board of Selectmen works with our EDC to establish a work plan for them. And the areas of focus are marketing, business outreach, and supporting entrepreneurs. And then similarly, our Police Commission also develops a set of budget priorities that are important to them. And their memo was included in your information as well. And this year, that's additional sworn and civilian positions, their overtime budget, fleet acquisitions, scheduling software, and then a couple of smaller capital items, which are replacement of their, it's called a less lethal launcher, as well as the taser replacements.
Can you say what a less lethal launcher is?
Sure. And it's essentially now, and you demonstrators can also speak to this, it's often what we use with the bears, and it's essentially a beanbag launcher.
Okay.
They're also used for anytime you have a situation where deadly force is not appropriate, but you need to stop someone if it was maybe they were going to hurt themselves or somebody else. Currently, we're using a shotgun platform, which is over 20 years old and no longer made. So the new, less lethal launchers.
Well done.
I know. I have to practice that. Are identifiable not just by our officers, but by any officers as a less lethal launcher. So.
Thank you.
But we do use them for airline as well.
I'll work on my pronunciation.
So some of the budget challenges or issues that we have, and a lot of these, we spoke to last year during Tri-Board, and they've really remained. We are just seeing tremendous labor shortages in the municipal market statewide. I think we have fared better than a lot of communities, but we're really just seeing tremendous shortages in our specialized and kind of more technical fields of study. There are just statewide shortages for assessors, building officials, registered sanitarians, planners, civil engineers, finance folks, town managers. And there are a number of factors that have gone into these shortages. And a lot of our professional associations, including the Town and City Managers Association, are working with our regional councils of government. So PROG is involved in this issue. And really trying to work with the state. A lot of this comes down to the certification requirements that are often needed. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of folks retire in these fields of study, and not enough younger people have gone into these fields to replace them. And frankly, following the pandemic, like a lot of essential service professions, we are not an attractive employer, at this point in time in terms of providing essential services and the work schedules, the in-person work that's required, that work-life balance. A lot of people are seeking post-pandemic. We are often on call, many of our positions 24 hours, 7 days a week. The positions need to be staffed. If a storm happens on a holiday, And again, so we're just as an employer, municipalities in general, are really just struggling to fill, again, a lot of those more specialized positions. It's also incredibly difficult to fill up part-time positions at the moment. And we're also finding our hiring processes are being delayed while we're searching for really the most suitable or most qualified candidate. It might take, 1 or 2 searches, sometimes 3 searches before we're really finding the right person. Other shortages that we're experiencing are various material shortages. Particularly, we're seeing a long lead time on some of our equipment and our fleet acquisition. We're just meeting with Parks today, and they just received a piece of equipment that they ordered over 30 weeks ago. Some of our departments, when they are placing the purchase orders for a vehicle that's been approved or a piece of equipment, they're being told you're going to have to wait for over a year. We have some vehicles recently had to wait 18 months for. So that's something that's been a bit challenging. And later this evening, you'll see that we are coming to the supplemental request because we put in a purchase order for a vehicle that was approved, and the initial purchase order was within the approved budget. And then the vendor who was on the state bid list could no longer fulfill the order because Ford couldn't provide enough of the promised vehicles, and so we had to go to the next best price with the next best vendor. So again, I know we talked about that last budget cycle, but we are continuing to see those shortages. We have a lot of inflation impacts on the operating and capital expenses, particularly with operating. We're seeing things in terms of utilities, which I don't think will come as a surprise to any of you. Certain agricultural supplies we're also seeing, such as fertilizer, some very big increases there. Also seeing some significant inflationary impacts on cleaning supplies, some of our vehicle-related supplies, oils, lubricants, pool chemicals. So again, seeing a number of inflationary impacts on various supplies that we rely on. For staffing needs, this is something that we are sorting through, but typically in a given year, we'll receive anywhere between 25 and 30 service needs that are enhancements that departments will submit, and then we will do our best looking at the organizational-wide needs and priorities to say if funding is available, here's a short list of needs that we would prioritize. But again, this also probably is not a surprise. The Parks and Open Space Master Plan had identified that we were short about 3 parks maintainers. We have added 1, so we know that is an area of continued need. We are seeing some needs in terms of meeting our fleet maintenance needs, both on town and Board of Ed, and we're looking at some opportunities together there. The Police Commission obviously has shared some of their staffing needs, and there are others, but again, we will shortlist sort of our most critical needs as we continue to move through our process. We are seeing health insurance cost escalation. This is something that we are still working on internally to work out a good number for budgetary purposes. And we sort of expected that this would happen, is that during the pandemic, a lot of our staff members, I'm sure you saw this is not uncommon, but a lot of services were delayed either by the provider or by the person choosing to delay services, delay procedures, delay routine medical needs. So as people are starting to catch up on that, as well as some outlier claims that we had, we're seeing some cost escalation here that we haven't seen in recent years. We will be working as we develop our capital budget to help identify potential uses of ARPA dollars that will keep in the spirit of the intended uses. I think we did do our best to try to do some of that in the last budget process and identifying capital projects in out years of the budget that we felt would keep within the spirit of the intended uses. But again, we will, as part of our capital budgeting and prioritization, take a look at that again this year. And then of course we'll have the impact of revaluation. I think Lisa did a very nice job of covering that. Our assessor's office is working through that very diligently. We'll have most likely some pretty good preliminary numbers when I release my budget at the end of February. but we might not have a firm final number until we're heading into the budget workshop with the Board of Selectmen. And I think what's interesting there is after the housing market collapse in 2008, we didn't see major changes in the mill rate during revaluation years because there wasn't that growth and sort of market value of whether it's commercial properties, residential properties. But that wasn't normal. Typically what you would see prior to the housing market collapse in reval years is that your property values would increase, but they would increase so much that you would also have dramatic shifts, dramatic decreases in the mill rate. But that hasn't been our normal now for over a decade. And again, just on a preliminary basis, I think what we can anticipate is a bit more what we would have seen prior to a decade ago. You know, that with the valuation increases in addition to the new growth, is I think we can expect to see a pretty dramatic shift in our existing mill rate.
Yeah, Maria, I'll just interject. When people they're going to get their notices of their home value, they should not apply the current mill rate to that because it will be a much lower mill rate, but we won't know what that is until April. So if you see a higher valuation for members of the public, do not apply the same mill rate. Wait until you get the new mill rate.
Yes, that's very, very good advice. And it's also hard to say, you know, what we saw with the reval 5 years ago is, and it can vary, but just the way that the market was 5 years ago, sort of homes, our smaller homes, saw about no tax impact in revaluation based on the market value at that time. The mid-range homes saw about a 9% increase in their valuation, and that affected their taxes even with that shift in the mill rate. What was really interesting last time was the sort of more expensive, larger homes, based on what the market was doing at the time, they actually saw a 16% decrease. And so it really can vary. I think this time, again, preliminary, what we're seeing is most likely that the mid-range homes and the larger homes will see an increase in valuation, whereas the smaller range homes a little bit less so. But again, we'll have more firm numbers and data and information from Nancy probably as we're heading into my budget.
Can you just review, because I'm forgetting, I thought that the company that we hired finished their work some months ago. So I'm wondering, have they not finished establishing what the value of each house is and each business is? Is that work not done?
Sure. So as part of it, it's a combination of the field inspections and getting all the data into the system. So the commercial assessment notices did go out. The residential is still being worked on.
What's the appeal period? I imagine you have up to a certain number of days to appeal.
Yeah, I don't have that off the top of my head. What we did do, and I would encourage folks who aren't signed up for it, is we do have our email news and announcements subscription service, and our assessors have been really helpful as we've been moving through the revaluation period. We have been periodically sending out updates. And we did recently send one out right before the holidays so folks know that the commercial assessments were going out. We provided a link to the information about the appeal process. And then, sorry, I can't speak to that date off the top of my head, but we do have it. If you go to our webpage under the news and announcement section, you can click on it. Or if folks are signing up again for our email subscription service, they will get those periodic updates about reval and how to appeal. Yeah,
I'm just dovetailing it into Lisa's comments about waiting for the new mill rate. If somebody hopes, if you don't know what the new mill rate is going to be, and you're basing your decision as to whether you're going to appeal or not based on a mill rate that hasn't come out yet, and you go beyond the appeal period, then I don't know if that's good guidance.
Is there information in the notice that says the mill rate, the old mill rate won't apply? It'll be
no.
Might be. Can you add that? Because otherwise, you're going to have a lot of gnashing of teeth.
Oh, why don't we get through the things and then we'll open it up to conversation?
Can I just ask one more question? Is there a target date for when those notices to residents will go out, and is there a legal requirement for how quickly they go out?
Sure. So I provided the assessor, they had requested a 30-day extension, which is not uncommon. So I did grant that request for them to finalize the grant list. So again, we do anticipate having these final numbers by essentially the end of February, early March. And then the residential notices.
So if the residential notices go out in the next couple of weeks, which is still end of January, beginning of February? Why does it take another month for
Yeah,
us to
there's
get
still
that
also
information?
personal property, motor vehicle, I mean, when they're working on finalizing everything, that's a pretty, substantial, body of work that they have.
But that's the bulk of it, though. You've got business done and the residence is done.
The commercial real estate, residential real estate, there's also personal property and motor vehicle.
Good to have some directional information sooner.
Again, this is very preliminary, as we're working through it, but again, just some projections in terms of, some of our costs and where we can expect to see some of the increases.
Is that it? Okay, Matt.
Great. Well, good evening, everybody. It's nice to be here. We're in a similar, a little bit ahead, I guess, on the timetable, listening to the timetable for your budget presentations. Our staff, our central office staff, has had an opportunity to meet with all principals, hear about their budget requests, meet with all our program directors. So I think we have a little bit more concrete information relative to requests and direction that they want. Our public conversations with our board have just started. We had one presentation at our last board meeting relative to special education, and we'll have another pretty significant presentation about personnel, drivers at our next board of education meeting. So this conversation is actually pretty timely. But we start in a similar fashion. I mean, our district works on a strategic plan. I didn't put the strategic plan goals up there, but we identified wholesome budget needs and priorities that I wanted to walk through and share tonight. I pulled those out up there. They really, I guess, in essence, fit into three categories. One is this inflationary factor that we've talked about. That plays into kind of our operational needs. We're seeing some significant increase in requests based on just kind of keep the operation status quo but adjust to the increases, things like utilities and so forth. We are heading into the first year of our teachers contract. As members around the table know, that's the largest driver in our overall budget on an annual basis. And that market has shifted pretty significantly in terms of what settlements are coming in at. So that's a driver that's larger this year than it's been in the past decade for the Board of Education. Members also know that one of the ways that we've tried to mitigate increases and also kind of establish new initiatives was through staffing offsets and reallocations in recent years, which was a result of a 10-year trend in declining enrollment. I have a slide that I'll share what our projections look like next year, a little bit of information for coming years, and that trend has reversed. So we're starting to see pretty significant increases in enrollment, first at our elementary level, and how we respond to those will be really important moving forward because they impact both what we call caseloads and special education for our teachers, as well as our elementary class sizes. We have capital non-recurring up there as a bullet. It's a little bit of an annual struggle for us. It's a $500,000 line item. I have a slide I'll share on that in a few minutes. That hasn't changed. In the 11 years I've been a superintendent, or I think the 5 or 6 years prior to that I was in central office. I'll shed some light on that a little bit, but that's something we want to try to look at in different ways to see if we can free up some more capacity for some of the smaller projects that we have in our 7 facilities. Non-lapsing, you had mentioned this as a positive, that we do have $650,000 in non-lapsing. Where we are in the process, we're talking about still utilizing that in the initial offset way that I'll talk about in a little bit, but absolutely correct, and that's a bucket for discussion as we work our way through the budget process. So I have 3 kind of data slides to work through, and then some of the fixed costs. So this is a snapshot at enrollment projections for next year. Vertically on the left, you can see the grade level configurations, and going across, you have the current year to the projection to what it changes at each level. So the biggest shift here, and the one that may be hard to absorb from just a straight flat staffing standpoint, is at the K-6 level. That's really attributable to what we saw early from the projections in kindergarten. We're seeing a projection in kindergarten that's over 350 students. We have not seen that in, don't hold me to it, but I think 15 years or so. It's been a long time since we've seen numbers like that. We need to get a little more information. I mean, that's something you need to see if it really pans out or not, but if it does, and in our budget conversations, that would actually require us to add a couple kindergarten teaching sections just to keep within the class size guidelines of, I was up to 22 in that primary area. So as we move through the budget process, that census information kind of starts to firm up for us. We get a little bit of a better idea, but that's certainly a challenge we need to think about. We do have space challenges that we've talked about in recent years, particularly at Supplemental Line. So it is exciting to see that Latimer progress going on. I don't know if people have driven by. It is quite an active site. They have foundations in. They have a huge crew over there, and that space will really help to free up and give us a little bit of flexibility moving forward. So that's just a quick look at projections for next year. This next slide is a look at an area that's been a challenge for us in recent years, a financial challenge. I should say this is just represents a comparative from 2018-19 to a projection going into the end of this year. The current number and the future number of students that have been outplaced to specialized programming. So we do continue to see a need post-pandemic, and the yellow line obviously was the pandemic year. It's a little misleading with the data, as I was talking through with our special services director. Many of those students, who some of them are compromised with health issues, chose to stay home during that period, and we offered online services. So we saw a dip there from the prior year in 1918. That's a little misleading in terms of those program needs didn't go away. It's just how we serviced them during the pandemic was a little bit different. So we continue to see these complex needs coming out of the pandemic. They increased a little bit. If I had to summarize the change as to what we're seeing differently, it's really a shift in focus from like complex learning needs to complex behavior and mental health needs over the course of the past couple of years. So as I know the boards are aware, we had a deficit in this area of tuition/transportation last year of about $500,000. So we're looking at that this year as we work through. We do a quarterly report at our next Board of Ed meeting to firm up what that deficit looks like in the current year, but it's something we feel we will need to address budgetarily in this line item as we analyze transportation and special education outplacement. They go hand in hand. The transportation has been tricky. Salter's being a wonderful provider for us. The shortage of drivers, it's these market conditions that have just made what used to be very simple things to plan much more complicated. You need to go to an outside vendor, you get charged a higher rate, and these things have led to some pretty significant escalation in pricing of programs.
Matt, this includes special ed kids and also maybe magnet schools and VOTEC kids? Or is
These
this
are
all
not
special
magnet
ed?
and VOTEC.
This is all special ed?
Correct. Yep. And the last one, it's a bit of a complicated slide. But what I'm trying to show here is go back to when we started to think about our long-range planning on both the maintenance side of things and maybe the potential reconfiguration and elementary look at our K-6 schools. So when TechDon came in and did this survey, they analyzed needs in different categories. And the need, we obviously, as we always talk about priorities, have paid attention to the most with the immediate need, which they felt in their assessment, you really want to get on these to the extent that you can within the first 3 years. It's how they built their program. And this is just a look at when we take that information out that feeds our capital plan on an annual basis and how we prioritize. They identified 188 areas to hopefully be addressed at some point, but as immediate needs. We're in year 4 now of that, and we've addressed 13 of the 188 through our CNR. This is CNR, our ability to do these things CNR. So it's just a snapshot of our need outweighs our ability to really get at this in an efficient way. We don't really talk too much in our budget process about the CNR account, but it's $500,000, but we also purchased 2 to 3 school buses out of that $500,000 on an annual basis. They're over $100,000 a shop, which leaves us $200,000 for 7 buildings. So it's just become, as we say, it's a prioritization exercise every year, but it's one where we're kind of falling behind and getting getting basic things done. We get, of all the push I get from my building leaders, come on, man, help us with this.
So I will say
You know?
we do have 3.7 million in ARPA, and the CNR capital reserve is not just for the town, it's for the town and Board of Ed. So we are going to ask Maria to incorporate some of Board of Ed needs when you do your CNR plan.
But just to kind of show a snapshot of where we've lived and some of the background work that we've done to try to get good information out there. So I'll roll through the fixed costs and where we are at this point. And this does not include, these fixed costs don't include any potential asks around special education. They don't include any potential conversation or asks around staffing. We felt the need to run those conversations through our board first. So this first piece is contractual costs that I referenced. Obviously, the teacher contract, it's a 2.67% increase for the overall operating costs. Slight decline in the administrative bargaining group. That's a result of, I don't know if you recall this last year, we went to a different kind of leadership structure, department supervisors at the elementary level. We eliminated an administrative position from the bargaining group. It's not really a net savings in overall dollars, but when you analyze that account, what sits in that account, it's a projected decline this year. And then we have the other bargaining groups. I didn't list them all out for tonight, but just, we have our SFEP group, which is our secretarial group, our paraeducator group, that's our second largest group. They're just entering negotiations now, so that started. We have our unaffiliated group, we have our custodial group, and other areas like tutors and that we've kind of rolled in estimates for another 1.68. So when you look at just our salary obligations this year without new asks, it's over 4%. So that's a very different look than we've had in other years. I listed a few of just kind of these market-driven increases. We'll continue to look at these as we go through. These are estimates. These are the main areas that we talk about. We're seeing escalation in utilities. Only a 15% increase based on Tom Roy's early work there. The transportation, a 4% increase. Substitutes. This is kind of the market area. Maria talked about the ability to attract employees that we struggle most with, and that's how we keep things going with quality individuals when our teachers are out sick or need to be out for medical purposes. That increase represents, and I'll certainly come back in the budget process and talk a little bit more about it, a little of a varied approach of trying to hire like what we call building-based subs. You pay them a little bit of a more increased rate than your daily subs that may be anywhere else, and they're committed to those buildings. You just, I think we pay them about $150 a day when our regular rate is $110 or so. So maybe going towards a few more of those people just to try to get consistency across buildings. It is quite the matrix to see how they try to plug these pieces in. And then we have the similar insurance, liability, auto, and property estimate there for an additional, close to 0.5% or a little over $300,000. So this is a look at how we had planned initially when we talked about the budget last year to utilize the non-lapsing to pay down the cliff a little bit and hopefully smooth that impact. So, we added quite a bit of staffing last year to, social workers, special ed teaching staff, I think 9 FTE total in the district. The town was incredibly helpful with the social workers, allocating the ARPA money for us and supporting us there. But we utilized grant funding for about $500,000 of the positions ourselves. So this would signal how we would try to offset that impact of $500,000 utilizing some of the non-lapsing. And I felt like, I had to come tonight with some kind of offset to show people. So this would be an initial plan to demonstrate how we could utilize some of the non-lapsing funding to lower that overall cost. So prior to insurance, which we hinted at a little bit, is also in a very different forecast position and different outlook. Our fixed cost would be a little bit above 4%. And then this is the early look at the insurance and the challenges there that represent trying to make up a little bit for the cliff that was created to be using our internal service fund. And then with the projection moving forward, the early numbers we were given are 14%. So that's a collective 20% look at. There are definitely conversations we can have, and I think creative ways we can talk about smoothing the cliff and everything else as we get into it. But those are the numbers we've been given at this point. And as I said, that's not a normal size driver for the budget. It's always the second largest driver, but it's not one that's normally larger than our teacher's contract. So when you roll that into the fixed costs and salary, you're at a 6.75%.
Thank you. So why don't we start with questions and then we can get into comments. Does anyone have any questions on what's presented so far? And I'll open up. We'll try and alternate between the boards so Susan and Wendy can help me make sure that I'm doing that fairly. Would anyone like to start us off with a question?
I have a simple question.
Yeah.
I think it's simple. We talk about, this is more for Maria, Amy, but it applies to everything. We talk about the 1.9 that we have in capital reserves available to us. I know we used some for Latimer this year, but I also just heard this evening that we have some assigned for either PD or public safety, and that we had some money assigned for the assessor. How much of that 1.9 is really unassigned?
How much do we have aside earmarked for the
Not
police
earmarked,
department?
I guess.
I have to look offhand, I want to say about 400,000, might be higher than that.
For the PD? Okay, and the assessor, I'm just trying to say, like, I know there's 1.9, but if some's already, is it assigned?
No.
Oh, so that doesn't include those, so
There-
there's more, okay, I missed that.
And the other stuff, like the PD is earmarked, but it doesn't have to go there.
Okay,
But it was the intention of your board to segregate those dollars so that we could keep a clear demarcation.
I feel better than 1.9 is the clear amount, so thank you for that, that was my question. Want to flip over to you guys?
Does anybody have anything? I think, we're just getting started, so I think we're just trying to take what you have to share today.
Any
Okay.
questions?
Yeah, and on this side of the table, aisle?
We'll let the Board of Finance, since we haven't had a chance to
Oh,
ask
yeah,
questions.
okay, sorry.
Any questions from the Board of Finance?
I have a question for Matt, and that's about class size. And I know we made the class size smaller for a period of time as the guidance because of COVID.
Yeah.
Are you reflecting going back to normal, or are you staying?
Yeah, our current class sizes now are normalized at the elementary level, if that's what you're referring to.
We are pre-pandemic.
Pre-pandemic, we were like 15 kids in a class. Now we're back to primary grades 18 to 22 to 25.
And high school is also pre-pandemic level.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, so that already
The high school conversation
reflects
ends up being
any
sort of,
savings that could have come.
Right.
Done.
Question for Board Vet. With the increase, especially that you're seeing in K-6, are you seeing it like a congregation in certain districts and what if some were
yeah, we've done a small redistrict. We did it last year to try to address some of the crowding at Squadron Line. So we took Dorset Crossing, which prior to it being built was originally zoned for Terriffill. But we were concerned not knowing how many people would, move in there over time, and Squadron being kind of the bigger facility placed at Squadron. We are moving those students back to Terriffill to increase some of those smaller class sizes at Terriffill. And then Cambridge Crossing, which is the development, right near Antonio's there.
Across from Old Barge.
Yeah. Any new, we're in the midst of a transition there. Any new contracts or move-ins to that neighborhood will be going to Terriffill as well. We have taken Aspen Green students down by Latimer, redistricted them to Central School. So we're trying
That's the Ridge.
the Ridge, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
the Ridge.
the Ridge.
Thank you, yeah. To try to even out some of these things. The challenge, having done this before when I was in Glastonbury, of trying to redistrict mass scale when your enrollment's going up is it doesn't do you any good unless you pull out and can go down a section. You know what I mean? You wanna see that immediate need to do that. But, I mean, Susan has asked us to take a look at various things as we move through our year this year. Also driven just out of the fact that Squadron Line is really significantly packed with specialized programming, where our preschool is, some of our specialized special education programs, and that's where we're seeing the concentration of the enrollment as well.
To your point, Heather, that's all part of our budget
Yeah.
workshop.
Did I understand that we're projecting an increase in enrollment of 113 students?
145.
Right, well, for this year, but
Yeah.
going forward each year,
113 each year.
what's
Now-
that based on?
So that's based on, you want to talk a little bit about that? But that's an annual process we go through with NASDAQ, but it's based on actual birth rates. But the reality is I mean, I have some wonders about the size of that kindergarten cohort, just having been doing this for a long time, if it will actually increase that way. And if it doesn't, it would significantly impact that 113 projection per year. You know, so monitoring this kindergarten this year, I think, for district planning is really crucial for both facility and budgets.
Some of it comes also from, as older people sell their house to
Yeah.
younger families moving in.
Right.
Correct.
The church.
That should always happen.
Yeah,
Also, this has a lot to do
Those
with
that,
new construction.
Yeah, but you can look back, over we have this going back over like a 50-year period, and you can actually see the curve basically replicate
right, it's
up and down within
Yeah.
200-300 students.
And
we're
also
way
there's
into that.
new housing available for older people, both rentals and places, over 55 communities where people can stay in town but free up their house. A lot of older people don't necessarily want to leave, but now that they have a downsizing option in town that allows for more young families to live in.
And just the way that cycle works, we've had as enrollment decreased, it worked its way through the elementary, through the middle. It's now at the high school. So for the biggest way to get students out of the system is to graduate them. And you will actually be graduating pretty small classes at Simsbury High for the next 4 years. They're gonna be smaller than we're used to seeing leave at the end of 12th grade.
I mean, it's the first time in a decade where your enrollment, your need, and inflation are all going in one direction.
Amy, can you just take a minute and pull up the budget modeling, and we'll pause there and then come back to more comments, but just sort of to take a first look. When we met with Francine in November, she thought the typical appreciation or increase in value would be about 30%. So does that mean your taxes go up 30%? No. But we're gonna take a look at some first looks. And Amy, can you sort of walk us through?
Sure, so, this is the slide that is replicated via.
Amy, I'm sorry.
Really visualizing. So this you'll see on the first flip slide that Lisa presented during her presentation. And then down here we have, what the estimated mill rate would be, so the scenario would be about 31 mills. And then you come down here to see the impact of the home and the value of the home impact. So typically we look at $350,000, $450,000, and $550,000 houses. So under this scenario, for example, we have the home impact going up 20%. So your new home value becomes $420,000 from the $350,000. So what does that do to your taxes in this scenario? Well, it basically keeps them flat. It's a slight decrease of $4. So that's at a 20% increase in the value of your home. If we take a look and we increase the value of your home 30%, there's a drastic difference in your taxes. Your taxes go up about $750. And then the value of your home is now $455,000. And obviously this translates down to all the individual.
Can you put those numbers in because Francine had told us 30% is the more realistic number.
So 30% is the average. She's also seeing, in this year compared to other years, where the lower valued homes are having less of an impact than the higher valued homes. So, for example, perhaps the $350,000 homes will only see a 10% impact, and the mid-level homes will see 30%, and then, the higher value homes will see like 35 to 40%. And that's one of the things that we're waiting on the reval company for, to give us that data on where those homes are placing in the scale of the reval.
So you can see we're looking at 1,600 increase 30. Probably the 750 are going to be more 35 to 40. So can you switch that to 35? Ooh.
I mean, I'm just trying to create some growth.
And then because we think the under 200, 350 was the median value prior year. So we think some of the houses lower than that will have a lower increase. But even if that's 25%, can you make the 350 25? So some people you can see are going to have 377. It will be the largest tax increase we've done in a decade and a half. Some are going to see 900, 1,000, 2,000, 400, we think, with the information that we have now. We'll have a better information as we get closer. Amy, what is the likelihood that that this initial projections on the grand list number will grow? For new value, not reval.
So for new value?
For new improvements.
New improvements, yeah.
So there will be some. I can't speak to what it will be right now. As we've seen in prior years, Francine's estimates are typically conservative. So hoping that that's the case this year as well. But I honestly have no more insight into where she thinks our economic development is.
So we're going to be, I think everyone can see here, we're going to be watching the grand list. It's fairly impactful. What we don't know, what this board is requesting, what this board feels we really, really need to understand is the difference between reval, which is tax levy neutral, doesn't matter. 2 homes, budget 10,000. 2 homes, each home pays 5,000. The home is worth 250. You do reval, it's worth 300. Still 2 homes, still the same budget. They're still paying 5,000. Reval doesn't change the taxes you pay. But if you add a new home, everybody's taxes go down to 3,000. If Linda's home does an addition because they're very crappy, and her value is now more than my home, she's paying 6,000. I'm paying 4,000. We're still getting to 10. But what we don't have is the new economic development growth and the added value, and that's what we're waiting for because that will determine. I think we can all say to people, I'm sorry your taxes went up, but your home value went up. You live in a desirable neighborhood. You're just going to have to bear more of the burden. But if our taxes are going up because of our spending, that's something we're all answerable to. Mm-hmm. So revaluation is just a redistribution, pay fair share. But taxes will go up if we're spending more, and we're seeing that we're spending more. So that could be a problem unless the grand list comes roaring in. So that's what we're waiting on.
What's the assumption on these numbers of the amount of the tax levy?
Where do you have the tax? Are you looking for?
No, not the mill rate, but just how much the difference in expenditure that we're covering.
That's about 7 million.
Okay.
Which is big. If you think about last year, it was about 3 million. Is that right? So it's more than double what the expenditure. We're spending more than double increase than last year. And so, I mean, it doesn't take rocket science. If you're spending more, taxes are going to go up. That's just the way it is. Now, the question is, what do you do with that? Some stuff is mandatory. You're required by law to cover. You have to do. Some are critical. pieces of services that we're legally obligated to do. We have to pay our debt service, we have to pay our pension obligations. But, so I'll open it up to discussion to get people's thoughts on that if they have any. I mean, the numbers are stark, and people may not have comments.
So if I understand this correctly, with these numbers, we don't know what portion of the total grand list will represent new development. So it might not be as dire as this appears, but
Correct.
in past years, new growth was 3%.
Yeah, so the last 3 years, new growth has been fairly remarkable. The current year that we're sitting in, new growth was over 3%. And the 2 years prior, new growth was over 2%.
But those numbers are high.
High, right? So in the last 20 years prior, outside of revale years, we had only hit new growth over 2% once. But the last 3 consecutive years have been incredibly strong years of new growth for us. So it'll be interesting to see sort of what's trending in terms of new growth, as well as new growth from the assessors team really working hard to pick up work previously that was either permitted or unpermitted new growth, in addition to sort of ordinary new growth. So there was that, an endeavor underway as well.
Yeah, so I just want to follow up with that question because when Francine came to us
November.
or even earlier, it was earlier than that because it was whenever it was. She talked about, projecting a significant growth in the actual grand list, not just not reapportioning, not inflating existing stuff, but enough that she thought there were $3 million worth of tax revenue from things that were not previously taxed. But now we're hearing we have no idea how much is coming in, so I'm sort of confused. How do we have less information now?
So that's the discovery that she was talking about when she gave those estimates. So we're already out, when she presented her grand list back in, I think it was November. That discovery that she was tracking separately, we were already at $1 million. So we know we're gonna hit the $3 million in discovery. What we don't know is the economic development compared to the revale breakout.
But the estimate
Yeah.
that we're using tonight is her best guess, and she updated that just last week.
But I'm still confused, and I apologize. The $3 million, I thought she was saying was new economic development that had not been, that the assessor's office had not been previously aware
Right,
of.
for prior years.
Yes.
It's not the economic development from last year to this year, for 23 to 24. That's the piece that we don't have. She did the discovery and promised that $3 million, and she got you that $3 million. But that's on the discovery of things that should have been taxed in prior years that were not taxed.
So you're saying there's $3 million in additional revenue, all else being equal, that will come in
Yes,
to offset that $7 million.
that's already built into these.
It's already, some of that's already in there,
Oh.
so it may not.
didn't
So I guess
understand that.
what we're asking is what could change between now and 2 weeks when they mail out the home
The home estimate.
assessments. What could change to make this better?
So she'll have the final data. So when the revale companies are doing their evaluation, they have all the data at their home sites. That data then needs to be integrated into our system, and then that's when we'll get our final numbers.
But I think it's fair to say, I mean, we're hoping the news will be better than what's on this slide, but a $7 million increase in expenditure is gonna have serious impact on the taxpayers, and maybe in some cases more than we want it to. So that's something we just have to all keep in mind and keep our fingers crossed about the grand list.
Is that 7 million, I wrote down gross expenditure increase of 6.23, that's the 7?
Now, can you talk about the difference on that slide? You broke it down, gross expenditure versus,
I'm wondering, is that the, what we're gonna have to be covering by this new revenue?
So the 6.23 that Art is referring to, that's just gross expenditures to gross expenditures. And then if you take out the revenue that the town gets, this is our net expenditures of what needs to be raised by grand list, and that's the 7.33.
Worse than I
Well,
thought.
so the gross expenditure includes, remember, the ARPA dollars are in there, so it just changes the percentages. So by the time you net out the ARPA, there's 3.7 million in ARPA, but you get 3.7 million in revenues. But it changes the percentages because it's different dollars. But yeah, it's a 7.33%.
So what is, when we look at these revenue increases percentages, what is by the preliminary number, the bogey we're gonna have to try to meet? Is it 6.23 increase in gross expenditures?
No,
It's the 7.
7.33.
Okay. Well, that's concerning.
Want to give members of the Board of Selectmen any comments or questions on sort of what we're seeing here? Board of Ed? Yeah, it's kind of breathtaking, right?
I have a question
Derek.
on, kind of related to the reassessment. You said the commercial side's already received their assessments. So has there been any initial feedback to the probably eye-popping number or increase in the assessment, from commercial or business owners in town?
Yeah, what's really interesting, at least so far, the only piece of feedback that's made its way back to my office, was the property owner who just commented on how helpful Francine and her staff were. So I do think that,
That's nice.
yes, it was very nice to hear, because oftentimes I always say that it's very easy for people to reach out when they're unhappy about something, but less so for somebody who can take time out of the day when they're happy about something. So I do think that, Francine and her team and the reevaluation company are fielding a lot of those comments right now. And typically with us seeking the extension, I would say probably most of the appeal hearings that we're anticipating would be, I believe, is that correct?
Yeah, so you're at the market April. But just to piggyback on that, when their notices went out, there was an opportunity for folks to come in and meet with a representative from the reval company to discuss their assessment. And we actually only had a handful of people that signed up for that. I think it was maybe like a day and a half came in, and got to discuss their assessment and go back and forth on it.
Does that, will that happen for resident?
And
Rachel?
we were gonna ask that. I believe so, but I will confirm for you.
Switching gears, if I might just take the floor for a couple seconds.
Go ahead.
The one thing that has really risen most, it's really the reason I'm bringing it up is because on the residential side, electricity supply, the supplier portion of electricity has doubled. So do we get a special rate, for the town or the Board of Ed because, we're a public entity, or, as it is deregulated, do you go out and try and search for best terms? Do you have to use Eversource as a supplier?
So I didn't speak to it, a very high level, and that's something we definitely have to probably speak to or follow up with about. But we'll typically enter into like a multi-year contract on rates, which is helping us a bit on the commercial side at the moment, compared to the proposed residential increases that Eversource has.
Okay, so you have to sign up as commercial. It's not like municipality rate or anything like that. So, okay.
And there are some things that we try to do, with peak demand times and with negotiating for those multi-year agreements and the commercial rate, looking at kind of kinds of things of that nature, which is a little different from the residential that we're currently.
But do you get the ability to choose your supplier as a commercial? Okay.
I just, drawing on a prior position I once held, the standard offer wins 90% of the time. So what you have to do is figure out is having someone play that game, get in there, look at all the different alternatives, make a calculated guess and hope you come out better. What the consumer advocate has found, they've advocated, is that 90% of the time you lose. So you're better off doing Eversource's standard offer, unless you're pretty darn shrewd about it.
Yeah, unless you change every 3 months.
Yeah, right.
Well, yeah, the rate, again, this is a unique year in that supplier rates have doubled. So that's really why I bring attention to it. And then just lastly, flipping back just to Board of Ed, Matt, you mentioned the presentation that was delivered on special education. I don't know if you could share that, but I would love to see it.
Sure.
And then specifically to the out of district, the 50 students, you know, what's the cost for those 50 students in total, do you know?
It's a little over 4 million.
4 million?
What's misleading about that is we budget net what they call excess cost. So the district gets reimbursed for anything above 4.5 times our per pupil expenditure.
Okay.
And we get reimbursed at like 75% rate. So our budget line item in that area has been about 1.6 million.
Okay, so that's the net number.
Yeah.
Derek, I was just gonna say, I would suggest, the meeting is on Simsbury.
Oh, is it?
Media.
Okay,
So I would
perfect.
suggest you watch it, because we've had good conversation around it, and I think
Okay.
that would be important for the context, rather than just looking at the PowerPoint.
And so you have the out of district, and then likely you have your in district as well, right? And so what's that total number as a percentage of the enrollment? I'm just curious.
Of special ed students or dollars?
Yes, well, that's kind of where it ends up, right?
It's about 16% of our student population has what they call an IEP, which is an individualized education plan.
Okay,
Total, when you look at special education as kind of a program, it's about 23% of our operating budget.
okay. Yep. Thank you.
That includes the outplacement costs.
And then just purely out of curiosity, with paraprofessionals, does the Board of Ed align paraprofessionals to students, or is there an amount of, parental involvement there?
Well, it's however the plan dictates, so those
Okay.
are collaborative conversations
Gotcha.
that happen in a meeting. We do have some students that have a higher portion of an adult, or maybe in some cases in our Ready, Set, Go program, which is a specialized autistic program.
Yep.
Each one of those students actually has an adult with them. So it varies.
Yep.
You know?
Yeah, makes sense.
So my perennial question about assessors' offices, where are we on the RFP and getting some best practices, help from consultants? We built that into the budget last year around, and to me, it's just so essential that we act on that as soon as possible, because looking forward, not only to the next budget year, but the next few years, we have big expense growth and not much revenue growth. And so we need to support our assessor's office in every way possible, because we need revenue growth to match the needs. And we haven't had any, to my knowledge, movement yet on putting out that RFP.
No, she's trying to get through right now, and then that'll be the next focus.
Is there a way that you could just,
Here's
you know,
what I found.
Here's what I
What
found. Lisa had done some work quite a while back and sent out best practices studies done in other states and in other towns. If you could just contact those towns and ask them what RFP they used and if they could share that. It's such standard language when you're asking for a best practices study that I think just about anybody in your office could grab that language, change the title to Simsbury, and get that thing out the door, because really anxious to see us get that underway.
And we know when we give Francine extra
Yeah,
resources,
she'll use them well.
she was able to capture, we anticipate 3 million. I mean, you think these numbers are bad, think how bad they would be if there wasn't 3 million in new revenue coming in. So congratulations to Francine for that work and putting resources there. I think to Linda's point, we view it as a spend to save, because it will help every other department.
Well, but I won't speak for my colleague on this, but I think what she's saying is that once you get the person, it's low hanging fruit. I mean,
We want to support both boards, and the way to do that is to improve our revenue stream.
I have a comment on ARPA. So, we have kind of a policy that we put together on intended uses, and we had found out that it's pretty much revenue loss. It's money in the bank that we can use. And last year, we used it for a lot of capital projects. We listened to the public. We assigned the money there. We did give a lot for the schools, 1.2. We did give money for Latimer and I believe the bleachers. So that's happened. When we look ahead, I think the consensus that has been on finance subcommittee meeting is to look at upcoming CIP projects to see how we can use some of this money to fund those which are kind of public. One of our items on the policy is capital projects, that support town-owned infrastructure and things like that. So items in the CIP that fit that bucket, to use some of the ARPA funds for that to alleviate the cost or tax impact that may happen to our residents. And then the other thing that I think we can look at also are some of the same projects in that category for capital projects infrastructure that help the greater good, that are planned to be bonded instead of some other form of funding. Because when you look at your chart where we go over the 8% somewhere out there, if we can reduce that now, we won't get to that. I'm not sure if the bridge project or whatever has some bonding components. Those guys know better than me, but something with that where if we could use the cash for that, it would lower that under the 8% in the future. So I just wanted to make that comment.
I think one of the things I think I can speak for our board is just watching this, and I think I can speak for all of us. Between now and March, we're going to need to look harder at offsets and what can we do to get that number down unless the grand list comes in. I think everyone's looking at, I know Maria, in your fixed costs, you still have CNR cash. That was a planned elimination, so that will immediately bring down $310,000 of your operating budget that we can easily do. Just to the extent you can, let's be aggressive in looking for offsets, being creative. We understand some things we may not be able to do. I think we want to signal to the public we're anticipating a tax increase this year, unless the grand list just is alarmingly bigger than what's projected. If it is, that goes back to Linda's point, we need to get the assessor study so we have better numbers and projections can do better long-term planning. So that's part of the thing. But I think everyone knows that those are things we're going to need to do. At this point, just looking at the numbers presented by our professional staff today, I'm looking at this, and based on the information we've got from the assessor, it's going to be a budget of fixed costs, critical needs, legal obligations, state mandates, and not a lot of discretionary spending unless something dramatically changes. And even for critical needs and legal mandates, we're going to have to struggle to see if there's any offsets we can do in the budget to be able to pay for those critical needs. Again, if the grand list comes roaring in, we'll have a different conversation. But that's sort of just what I'm seeing. Is anyone seeing anything differently there?
Well, just to kind of carry on with that, and I know it was brought up last year, but just really working to find savings and growth initiatives, and not just in addition to finding to gaining those revenues that are out there, but how do we really get creative on bringing growth to this town and kind of offsetting the residential with maybe something new, something different. How do we look for savings initiatives? And I just think now more than ever is really doing that.
Matt, to your question, do all the schools have LED lighting at this point?
Yes. Jason's nodding.
They
do.
That's one low-hanging piece of fruit we don't have. And Maria, all town buildings have LED.
Yeah, I continue to do a couple of lighting projects. You may recall a few years ago, Board of Finance authorized us to sort of pay back through the lighting structure. I think when we were speaking with Tom about it, March, we're going to be doing our facilities meeting a little later this week, that there may be opportunities to go back and actually update some of the work that was done quite some time ago, because there's some newer technologies that are always coming out. So we'll be talking about that in a couple weeks.
The only thing I'll sort of end on, we do understand we're a service organization and we do have legal obligations, and our job is to sometimes, we're not a business, we don't have a profit, so we do understand that is out there. We do have critical needs we do have to meet. but how we view those critical needs and prioritize them. And this is going to be a year to sort of think about those priorities. And, you know, in some ways, the pandemic was helpful. We saw what were our core needs during the pandemic. So that will, but obviously, you all know how to do that. You look at open positions, do they need to be filled between now and then? Matt, just quick question for you. I know you said the next quarterly report, you'll have an idea of how far behind you are in your budget, because that may impact your non-lapsing fund, how much you need to use there, which may then impact your budget. So we'll have a better idea. When you have that, can you just get that to us? We'll get that from Amy.
Yes.
For Matt and Maria, are there any material expenditures coming up that weren't budgeted that this board should be aware of? Either as supplementals or not as supplementals, a legal settlement that we need to be aware of and start planning for?
You know, for us, I would say potentially additional grant monies. I think we talked about it, the November meeting. We are anticipating some grant dollars and some donations regarding the Meadow Barn restoration. Again, we don't have those grant award dollars firmed up yet. We don't have all the exact numbers from SHPO, but that is something that we're going to do our best to plan for as part of the upcoming budgeting process, but those may come in earlier. So that's something we're sort of working through still at this point. And then I think we may have mentioned this as well, the federal grant program that we have received some dollars for the section of trail that's from intersection Hot Meadow and 315 and Curtis Park, that there's some cost escalation there. So similar to the state grants and some of those multi-use path projects recently, we are anticipating, we don't know what that dollar number would look like yet, but some additional grant dollars coming in from the federal government to help with some of that cost escalation. So again, I think some of those infrastructure dollars that were out there, we could see some additional grant monies come in before June 30th.
I'd say from our perspective, if there's a funding source other than the taxpayer, that's an easy thing for us to prove. We understand the grants are coming in. We're just thinking, are there any things that might impact, we have to dip into reserves or costs that we know about at this point?
Really think of, again, most of the thoughts I have going to sort of grant funded projects would be either receiving additional funds or potentially new grant opportunities that we recently applied for.
And then lastly for Amy, we saw motor vehicle valuations just roar last year. We imagine that they're going to come down a little bit. I happen to know that some of the used car valuations are coming down. How will that impact? How do you see that impacting, if at all? Because we're still anticipating getting reimbursed from the state some amount.
Yeah, so we haven't heard any changes from the state as far as their financial contributions. So knock on wood, it stays the same, and we're in the same position we were last year. But I haven't heard anything from CCM or the state.
Okay, so that'll be something we'll watch and monitor. And it's Melissa here. Give us any updates as you get them. That would be very helpful. Any other sort of last thoughts? Anyone? You know, we've got a big job ahead. It's probably one of the hardest budgets I've seen because the tools we have are limited and the expenditures are, significant and nothing that you could have planned for and sometimes out of our control. That said, we do know, I think Derek made the point, people are paying a lot in utilities right now, they're seeing costs. So it's a struggle. It's gonna be a struggle. So, but I think we've worked in the past pretty well together and we'll collaboratively try and figure out ways we can get some of the bigger drivers. Health. Do we have any newer numbers on the health estimates yet, Amy? What could happen working with our consultant that could change that number?
So all they do is reevaluate our claims and Maurice and I think they would have them through November, if I recall correctly. So whatever our claims have done since the last time we looked at it through November, that would be the only change.
And when will we have that information?
She just said this week.
Pardon?
This week.
This week? Once you have the new numbers, can you just send us out? That would be great, especially if they're good numbers.
You said the recommendation was to not change it, right? To not modify it. I believe it was a 23% number. And so is the calculation being rolled like every 12 over 12 months, such that we do have good data up to a month ago, or are we looking for like all, basically brand new data?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
The projections of what I guess the claims will be, right? Is that done monthly, or is it, how often is that done?
It's done periodically, typically for our budget process, they do it monthly until we're into March timeframe.
Okay.
When they do their last look, but other than that, outside of the budget process, it's not done monthly, we look at it on a quarterly basis.
And the last thing I think we mentioned it earlier, but Matt, if you could please get Maria your CNR request, because that capital reserve is for both the town and Board of Ed, and when the Board of Selectmen gets it, they can prioritize all the CNR needs for the entire town and Board of Ed. Is there anything else anyone has? Okay, and I just, we had an opportunity to give Maria the board had made requests were permitted by the charter and Connecticut general statutes to make formal requests for the budget, and we've given our request to Maria on that. Matt, I don't think ours, other than as you get us the numbers, I don't think we had any more specific than other than the CNR. To please make sure you get those.
Okay.
That's in addition to the 510. Right. Is there anything else? Matt, Maria, or Amy, or Melissa, is there anything you think the policy boards need to know at this point? Anything you want to add? Well, everyone's quiet. Okay.
We're waiting.
Well, yeah, well, we always do. But this is the numbers are quite a bit larger than we've ever seen, so maybe more work than usual, but I have faith in all of you to come in. So, no, we don't. We need a motion to adjourn the tri-board, but unfortunately our board still has a few more items to do. So can I have a motion to adjourn the tri-board?
I will.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of adjourning the tri-board?
Aye.
Okay.
Stay in here.
Feel like they need additional? No. Does anyone feel like we need to continue the budget?
No.
At this point, we felt like we've,
No new pledges.
Exhausted.
okay. So we'll go on
Can
to
I follow along with
reallocation
you?
of savings and
Close
use of
down
town aid,
my
loan
computer.
for public
I really
works
did
truck
think
purchase.
Sorry.
I don't know if Tom Roy is joining us, or Maria, you're gonna handle it.
Should I take this one? But I do think it's fairly straightforward. So, we had an approved CNR project for the replacement Ford F-350 for our highway division of the Public Works Department. And that includes all the winter attachments, including the snowplow. And so earlier in the year, again, it was an approved CNR project. We issued our purchase order, came out for just under $50,000, which is within budget, with an approved vendor on the state bid list. Ultimately, what ended up happening is the vendor that we made that purchase order with canceled the order because they said they were no longer able to fulfill the order because they didn't receive the amount of anticipated vehicles from Ford they had anticipated. So that put us in a bit of a predicament because now we had to essentially go back to the bid list and try to find a vendor that we could find the vehicle for. And the next best value that we could find was for just under $80,000. The positive news is that Public Works took a look at savings from other approved projects, and the trade-in value actually that was offered was a little bit higher than we had anticipated. So really, the net impact was just over, I got the number, just over $3,000. But this was a county road purchase, and the county road fund balance the county road purchase isn't a sufficient fund balance isn't a sufficient position to absorb that additional $3,100. So Public Works was essentially seeking approval of this in order to move forward with the purchase.
And where would the $3,100 come from?
The county road fund balance, we did put those numbers, and that is in the very.
But you just said it wasn't.
I'm sorry, it was.
No, it is
sufficient. So it would have had a general fund impact. And again, this was part of a planned town aid road purchase. So it would not have a negative general fund impact for us.
Amy, where are we on supplementals? We just did the referendum. How many supplementals do we currently have approved? Just monitoring the total amount.
I thought I counted them 13 or 15, something like that. I think it was 13 actually.
Good for you.
13 what?
Supplemental appropriation.
No, but left, because some of
Oh,
the ones
left.
out of, are no longer counted. The referendum ones are now not supplemental. They've been approved.
I don't think we have any others. We approved the ones that we needed to approve with the bleachers, and then we made the other ones subject to referendum, and the referendum passed, so I'm not aware of any other ones that have been on.
We approved 15 supplementals, so we only sent 4 to referendum, so there must be some that are counting towards the 3% left, right?
Right.
So what is that amount? I just want to make sure we don't get ourselves in a bind. Over 3,000, we're not going to, but it's good to, if we could have that every
A
meeting.
constant tally,
Yes,
a running tally.
a running tally with total would be helpful for every meeting.
Is there an action to be taken?
There is.
Okay.
So we're about 1.6 million.
So we still have another 1.6 to go before we would hit another referendum call. Okay. Any questions on this request at this point?
The request is to spend 3,000, right?
Just 3,000.
3,000.
Yeah, so the motion is in your
Just a
packet,
few extra zeros there, well, all right.
right? Okay, may I have a motion effective January 17th, 2023 to increase the appropriation for the purchase of the replacement highway division 1-ton truck and related equipment by $29,661 to be funded by CNR project savings, increased trade-in value, and town aid road contribution. We're gonna need that dollar amount for the motion. Additional contribution of,
The town aid road, contribution is estimated at, $3,180.36.
$3,108.33.
36.
30 cents. So that is a cap. So if you exceed that, you'll come back to us, I assume. Okay.
So can, just to be clear, we're approving 29,000, but not really saying in this what it's offset by, so that the net is only
Let's can we get
zero.
clarified motion on that, please?
How would you like to do it? So the document does show you it's being funded by $23,452.64 in savings from the identified projects that we presented. And that the trade-in value we were receiving was $3,100 more than originally budgeted / anticipated, with the remaining balance of the 29 and some change coming from that 3108.36 town aid road contribution. So those were essentially the three buckets, and it's on page
2.
So it's all moving around within existing budget lines.
So it's a net supplemental appropriation of
Of zero.
3,108. That's above what the voters approved.
Okay, but it's not above what was in the original budget overall.
It is above what was in the original budget overall
Yes.
for this truck by 3,000. Or more than that. How much over budget is this?
Right, so it's about 29,000 over budget, but again, we identified $23,000 in other public works project savings that we could reallocate. And then the trading value actually came in a little bit higher than we had anticipated by essentially $3,100 additional trade-in value, so that helped offset that increase. So we would really only be going into the town aid road fund balance for just about $3,100.
So it's 29,000 over budget. I'm trying to look
Within a
at,
line item, but
That
overall.
represents a net expenditure of
3,100.
and what is
I
the
just- I
gross
think it'd be good to
expenditure? What is
say
the
that.
total amount? Is that the 210?
Purchase, sorry, the total purchase
Oh,
for
okay.
vehicle, the snowplow, sander, et cetera, is $79,661.
On the next page, so
Yeah.
there's savings here that will offset the.
No, I know, but I'm not seeing the total cost for
It's
the truck.
in paragraph 6 on the financial impact.
At the bottom of page two, it's $79,661 is the purchase price for the vehicle, the snowplow, sander, all the attachments.
So that's more than 30% over budget.
Right, and so again, the original vendor that we went with, we're going to be able to make the purchase within the budget, with what we had estimated for trade-in value. But again, they canceled that purchase order, and this was the best rate we could find off of available state bid pricing.
So how could they cancel that? Weren't they obligated to?
They said that they would fulfill order, that they didn't get the anticipated amount of vehicles that they were anticipating from forward, so they could no longer fulfill the order.
And how do we we have one vendor that we deal with? I mean, they're,
No, not necessarily. It will typically work off of the state bid list. That's usually the best pricing available to us.
Tom did say he tried everywhere to get the vehicle.
This is next best price that we can find.
so the total increase is $3,100 over what we had budgeted.
Right, because we're taking savings, project savings from other.
Oh, it's 29,000 over budget.
Well, are there other projects or are there other things with savings?
Yes.
Well, because I'm wondering if this request didn't come in, when would we have seen these benefits to the, I guess they're attachments, but not all of them are attachments, right? There's a track skid steer loader. That's not an attachment to a public works truck, is it?
That's a piece of equipment. I think
Right.
that's the one. We recall there was an opportunity that we came to you all in this late spring around May timeframe because we we had found a vendor that we could get a really good price for if we expedited it and bought it in the spring as opposed to July 1.
Oh, yeah.
That was a
Yep.
savings.
I remember that. Yep.
And so this, if we looked at the CNR, this is the top priority. Everything else, something will drop off because we're going to use this money. Is that sort of how we think about it? This is the top priority.
Typically with these savings, if we didn't bring it to you now as part of this plan, it would be part of year-end project closeouts.
But doing it off cycle, we're putting this ahead of all other
Yeah,
CNRs.
because
So
it
is that,
Yes, because it was an existing approved product, right? So if we didn't take care of it now, then we would just have to come back and take care of it now. Yeah, that's fair, because it was an approved product, we're trying to take care of it now.
so it comes higher in priority than what's on the list for next year?
Exactly,
Okay.
exactly, right, because this was something that was already scheduled for replacement.
Just wanted it on the
Yeah.
record. Thank you. Because that means there's going to be less available for other projects next year.
Is there a truck available, or do we have something tangible that we're going to be able to receive within the next 30 days?
My
Call it.
understanding is the vendor is getting a bit antsy for us to finalize all of our appropriation sort of process that we had to go through because they're very in demand. So they've been, again, my understanding from Tom is they are antsy for us to finalize the process because they have other people who would take it if for some reason this fell through.
Okay, so we have it. Okay.
So we've got a motion to increase the appropriation for the purchase of the replacement Division 1 truck and related equipment by $29,661 for a total cost of
79,661.
$79,661.
But
This
at
is
a
for
net increase.
clerk to be funded with, and can you go through the dollars that we're funding it with?
Sure. So it would be funded an additional increase of $29,661 would be funded with $23,452.64 in Public Works CNR project savings as presented. And additional trade-in value generating $3,100 in savings. And then a county road fund balance contribution appropriation of $3,108.36.
Thank you. For our clerk, if you could just include the breakdown in the motion. So we have that motion. Who made that motion initially, Linda?
I don't think we've made a motion.
Yeah, somebody's going to move that.
Okay, Linda will move that as presented. Second. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, that motion carries. Thank you. And then the last item we have is, because we are having trouble getting information, because of, just the normal course of information. One of the things that for our board has discussed the importance of not getting information on the night of the meeting, making sure we have time to review it and analyze it and think about it in a timely manner. I did add an additional Board of Finance meeting for March 28th in case we need time to review documents if we don't have them. And that's based on the discussion with Maria. You recommended we do that because you weren't sure you could get us information.
But we had also shared that part of the challenge with providing information are the constraints we have around various timing of notices and meetings, and that there's just very, very, very narrow windows. And I think that when Melissa took a look at the proposed meeting date of March 28th, that would not provide us sufficient time with posting the reflection. And I'll also explain this, but with legal notice requirements under the charter, I don't think that would allow us enough time with the public hearing. That's right. So the public hearing was actually approved for on your regular meeting schedule for April 4th, not April 10th.
No, we adjusted that. We approved it for April 10th because we're not holding a public hearing on Passover.
Okay.
When we approved our hearing, we checked with Amy. She said we could do that by charter. The last day we can do it is April 10th. Is that incorrect?
No, that's correct. It doesn't give you a start date, but that's fine. In that case, I think March 28th would provide enough time.
Okay.
Oh. Yeah, that would be the one challenge. I think that would be one challenge, that is school vacation week, so, and the board of selectmen does not schedule meetings that week because most of the board members are traveling. So it just might be limited, public participation potentially, as well as,
I'm sorry, what? I can't hear.
school vacation week is the week of April 10th, so, and the board of selectmen will typically not hold meetings that week because again, oftentimes board members are traveling, staff members are traveling, and we just may not have as much public participation because we do have a lot of people just in the general public who travel that week as well.
So is your preference we hold it on Passover?
It's not, can I just weigh
Yeah.
in? According to my calendar, Passover starts the evening of the 5th.
I had, okay, so maybe I have that wrong.
We do try to
Yeah.
be relatively
Yeah, I
around
Googled.
scheduling around the
Nice.
holidays. And if we did make an error, I'm sorry, but we do try to.
It's
Ah,
just, yeah,
Okay, so we
starts
could
the-
do it on the, so we could do it on that, but one of the things our board really needs is that summary sheet. We talked about that. You had expressed concern that you couldn't get that to us, but I don't see how we can go forward without that information. So we need to know what is the draft budget we're approving, what is the draft hearing we're approving, because we approve it and then it goes out, but oftentimes we don't see it until after it's gone out. So we just need the opportunity to see it, and time to think about it. We did notice last time, when we had the bonding resolutions, there was a change made in the wording that was not brought to our attention. We didn't have time to read it. And so we talked about this in person. The Global Initiative on Financial Transparency really talks about how it's important for the policymakers to have time to read the documents. So that's all we're asking. And we're not asking for documents that you don't have to prepare anyway. We're just asking to get them in sufficient time so that we can read them.
And again, I think that this is probably, the board of selectmen have asked, directed us to prepare CNR request for charter revision, and I think this is a topic that staff would most likely very heartily welcome in terms of timeline, process, dates, because again, a lot of the challenges we have with and again, this is not something I was even accustomed to, but, you know, when I came here, we inherited a system where much of what we're doing it on the floor, right? And we're bringing printers and you guys are seeing things as we're printing it. And again, it's because of oftentimes the constraints we have with how many dates and how many boards are involved and very specific timelines around legal notices, et cetera, that it is just very, very, very cramped. And sometimes we do only have a night or 2 nights to turn around materials, which can be challenging, right? And it's not fair to you.
But there is a draft, and so we could look at the draft. So we would just ask to see the draft information with the understanding that the changes may happen on the night out, but then when we have the draft, we can highlight, okay, what changed, and then we can review it. That would be really, I think, very important for us.
We just have, really good partners in our bond council. The bond council does work with us to prepare that, and they are very responsive because they are also working, oftentimes with us on very, very tight turnarounds. But that, again, that's I think something that we're finding ends is that for further improvement, this will definitely be an area that we'll all have a conversation around.
Yeah, and as you get the draft, I mean, you obviously have the draft from bond counsel. She's not writing it on the night of our meeting, so if we could just see that draft before our meeting, that would be very helpful. The other things are the legal summary. You have that, and you just fill in numbers. It's a standard form, and it's an Excel sheet, so if we could just see that when you present your budget. And then before the public hearing, so the public has that. And then obviously the draft final budget, which is our budget that we post every year. We would just like to see that as a summary document, and we talked about what that looks like. And you had thankfully said that that would not be a problem. So I just wanted to put in the extra meeting date in case you needed some flexibility. But if you can get us that, we don't need that. But if you can't, we are going to need an extra date. So why don't can you give us some guidance on that?
Again, we'll do our best. We're all going to be, down the stack over during budget. So we want to do our best. We'll do our best.
I will not vote to approve any budget where I have not had time to look at it. So I'm just so that you know that. So we will have extra meetings if we don't have that information.
The only thing is if the public hearing is on April 4th, which we planned for, the legal notice has to be published in the paper on March 28th, which would be getting it to the end of the week prior. So the 28th would be too late to approve something that we need to have on file with the town clerk, that's all. So it's the 4th of April, and the 28th is too late to approve something.
But if we did it, when is school break?
The week after that, so the week of the
10th, you said.
Yeah, that's why we usually do the public hearing a week prior to that, because that's what the school week. The charter says April 10th, but that's only fall.
Until many of us have kids in school.
Well, for the public who may want to come. So I guess my concern is I don't understand when we have drafts of the budget, it's just printing the Excel spreadsheet, why we can't get a copy of that. Forget about the bond council thing. Why would that be a difficult thing to get?
You mean the board of selectmen budget that will present to you on the 21st?
No, we always print out, can you pull up, are we online?
No.
Okay, so every year we publish our final budget, which is just the line items and the CIP and the CNR. It's what is the final budget. It has everything all together. Last time, Melissa, you got that to us in advance, and Amy, so that we could see the changes. So that would be helpful to print out. It's just a document, I think it's like 70 pages, 40 pages, I don't know how long, but it's online. I brought it to the meeting and showed you, and you
I'm sorry, there's so many versions as we're working through, I'm just not even sure right now which reference, like which version of which document you're referencing right now, Lisa. I'm sorry, I'm just not following.
Okay, so we can talk offline and I can show you again. It's the documents I brought and showed you. It's no different than when we met.
Just the big stack of the spreadsheets,
The
not
board of
all
selectmen
the.
adopted budget?
Yeah, last time we did it, Amy put in the changes from the Board of Selectmen to the town manager.
Yeah, maybe we get on offline, because I think we're confused right now, which version which point of process. I'm sorry, we're just confused, so we can talk about that.
So, okay, when do you want to talk about it? It's very hard to, I just want to make sure that we get this resolved. Are you around this week?
Yeah.
Okay, after the meeting, we can talk. Okay. All right. So then currently the public hearing is scheduled for March 10th. We may need a motion to adjust that date then.
I mean,
Your regular
April
meeting schedule
10th.
has it for April 4th, so I'm confused.
No, we we changed the motion.
Check my calendar. Send out calendar invites for every meeting, right?
I mean, it's in our packet as April 10th.
That's not what we voted on because we changed it. But if it's not on Passover, we can do that.
I'm having a Seder. Well, no, it's
Public hearing I have on the 4th. Nothing on the 10th. Let's do it the 4th.
Oh, actually, I realized I have it in my thing, so I can just show you after the meeting. I brought it. All right, so then we may need a additional hearing or additional date for a meeting. I don't know. Hopefully we don't, but this is a very compressed schedule.
I mean, isn't it typical that we extend the public hearing for another?
Yes,
Anyway,
yes.
so we probably want both.
So we will need another public hearing continuation because we can only continue it for 10 days. Isn't that correct?
You know, usually when you continue it, it's for a week or two, usually 2 weeks.
I thought there was a 10-day limitation. We had to hold a hearing within 10 days.
When you close the public hearing, you have 10 days to file. Is it 10 days? Yeah, 10 days to file with the town clerk's office. Maybe that's the 10 days. Yeah, because you don't technically close it. If you're gonna have a second one, it's really a continuation, so you just have to keep it open. And then once you vote to close the hearing, and that could be at 2 weeks later, that's when you have 10 days to file a budget with the town clerk.
Okay. As long as that's legal. So then, well, we can also schedule another continuation for April 10th, if we need it. And then the 19th if we need it.
Yeah, I mean, I think typically, at least my memory is when you've done a continuation of the public hearing, then you would often do that at whatever your regular April meeting would have been. So for example, as Melissa was saying, if you needed to do a continuation, you could do that for your April 18th meeting as a for example. And then if you closed the hearing at that continuation on the 18th, you would have 10 days to file with the town clerk.
But if we need another,
Like a third?
yeah, when would we have time to do that?
I don't know about.
We would then push into,
We would just go that night until the public hearing was done. That's what, I mean, that's what happened. So I don't know I've never been to a third public
Yeah,
hearing.
that's
No,
a little
me neither.
unusual, so I think we would have to kind of re-look at things if we were to build in a third public hearing. But if we were to do a second, again, at least in the past, when we've done the second, you've often like utilized that sort of regular meeting in April night as the second, and then you have the 10 days. And when that's happened, I think we've typically done the referendum the third Tuesday in May as opposed to the first or second. So it just bumps things up a little bit, but it's
Right.
enough time to get tax bills out on time.
okay. Are people
Hold people
comfortable
to
with that?
that 3 minutes. That's what we have to do.
Right.
You know?
And there aren't that many people that come, sadly.
Well, sometimes there are. All right, so then I think we need a motion to amend the public hearing to back to April 4th. Because I think we voted on April 10th.
well, I'll move.
Yeah, I'll second
Okay,
it.
all right, any further discussion?
No.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, so everyone put the public hearing on April 4th. All right,
Change my, good thing I
Motion to
do my
adjourn.
calendar and pencil. Yes, me too. I vote to adjourn too.
okay, so all in favor?